want to emphasize right from the start that my one-time experience with Datura was by no means pleasant. I'd heard that hallucinations and such could be achieved by eating some of the seeds. A friend of mine who knew where some could be picked got a baggie full of seeds and gave to me. 3 other people that I worked with also wanted to try it. We all ate about a tablespoon of seeds and went home. Nothing about this experience was pleasant. Physically, the severe dehydration was without a doubt the worst I have ever experienced. I could pretty much stand in front of the toilet with a quart of water and begin drinking it with it going straight through me. This would last the entire duration of my trip. Trip is not exactly the word I'm looking for, but it's the best I can do. I tried to go to sleep, but everything was kind of blurry and surreal. After a while, into the bedroom walks a friend of mine that I hadn't seen in a while. We chat a bit. I'm trying to be quiet so as to not wake my girlfriend. Into thin air he disappears, although this doesn't seem too strange to me. A short while later, in comes another friend, who soon disappears in the same fashion. The only thing that struck me out about this entire parade of people marching into my bedroom was that my girlfriend hadn't gotten mad and kicked all of us out. A couple of times she did poke me and tell me to shut up, but that was only because I was doing all the talking. I had several visits that night. Another thing that I kept doing, as did a friend on his experience, was to try and light a cigarette, but get thinking about something and never get it lit. Then a bit later try to smoke it. I'd realize it wasn't lit and start to light it without getting the job done. Over and over and over. On one of my many excursions to the kitchen for more water then straight to the bathroom, I passed by a friend standing in the corner with a paper bag over his head. Just standing there. I said hello on my way, but this didn't seem unordinary at all to me. Everything was as it is in a dream, kind of vague and unreal. A couple of times I started to get ready for work, even though I didn't have to be in for several more hours. Luckily there was a voice of reason somewhere in my head that explained that I wasn't needed at work, not for quite some time yet, and I went back to bed. I'm sure that would have made quite a spectacle, showing up for work in the state I was in. The entire experience lasted for about 15 hours. Except for my eyes being so dilated that I couldn't even read a newspaper. That lasted about 3 days. I wasn't sure if my vision would ever return. I will never try this again, and urge anyone considering trying it to not do it. I can tell you firsthand of the toxicity involved and that I consider myself lucky to have gotten off so easy. Here I will try to describe and explain events that have happened to me during my Datura trip. I would be very pleased if my story would be published on your site because I think it would help people get a perspective, basic information and consequences of Datura trip. I think my story shows typical effects of low and high doses of Datura. Excuses for bad English grammar or any bad spelling. I hope that the text is understandable. Background. I was always open-minded to new experiences, that is new drugs. I never had any fears with first times. Since Datura I have taken almost every no substances except heroin, which I told myself never will. I never experienced problems with addiction but with one, marijuana. I was so addicted to it that all my life was smoke, smoke and smoke. When I woke up in the morning smoke was the only thing I was thinking about. In average day I would smoke 5 or more times a day. It is odd that drugs that are considered to be highly addictive, cocaine for instance, never affected me that way. I live in Europe in a country named Croatia. I am pretty rich kid, and can have anything I wish for. Long I've been searching for LSD, which was very hard to obtain. After seeing world from the eyes of the LSD I thought there was nothing else to see. I thought I was everywhere and saw everything, if I exclude heroin, which I clearly said I will never do. But man, I was wrong. After doing LSD few times and looking for new, undiscovered grounds of human psychology on a road I found her, Datura. I was reading Datura experiences, and when I saw what people say about it I just had to try it. The biggest problem was I didn't know where to find it. After 1.5 years of search for Datura I concluded that it doesn't grow in my country, or if it is that I will never find it. One day I parked my car on the riverside and rain started, so me and my friends agreed to stay in the car until it ends. I accidentally looked 3 to 4 meters in front of my car and saw something that appeared to be Datura. I asked my friend what does he thinks, and he said it is probably it. But it was somehow strange, mostly leaves which were different than photos I saw on Erowid. But it had seed buds. So I took one in the car and cracked it. It was still very green and juicy and seeds yellowish red. It was still young, but what the heck, it's worth to try. Experimenting. Although I have no fear from trying new substances, I consider myself very careful and smart with making decisions about amount ingested, especially with powerful stuff like Datura. Because the seeds were still young, I decided to ingest orally 30 of them first evening. After ingestion, I sat in front of my computer and started to read Datura experience reports on REEAAL. I didn't eat anything few hours before consumption, so I concluded that it could hit me pretty fast. After I read few stories, I suddenly felt scared and started thinking, what am I doing? I will go through real horror tonight. After considering what am I just thinking, I chilled myself down and went to bathroom. So I was sitting on the toilet looking all around and expecting to see some sort of hallucination. When I realized that there will be no hallucinations, my attention was drawn by the water in the bucket under the sink. There were traces of laundry detergent floating on surface, and it appeared to me that they are moving. I couldn't see any reason why would they move, cause I didn't move or even touch the bucket, and I was sitting on toilet for 10 minutes, so no one or nothing else could affect that water to move. I was trying to concentrate and make illusion to vanish, but I simply couldn't. After that, I went back to my room and sat in the dark looking at the computer screen, which on moments had some lines on it, something like when your cell phone signal before call disturbs your screen, monitor, TV, etc. Then I started looking posters on the walls in the dark, and I saw lots of different things on them. But I repeat, it was dark, and when I look at them in normal condition in darkroom, imagination comes on action, so I cannot tell for sure whether those were effects of Datura or not, but I think it was my imagination just a little bit helped by Datura. Then I decided it was time for bed. I expected this small amount of Datura could help me have some very intense or realistic dreams. I lay in bed and suddenly some spooky shadow man appeared by my bed trying to grab me with his shadow claws. Every time he swigged to get me, he made some weird spooky horror sound. But interesting thing was, I was not afraid of that shadow at all, and was just curious to see what will happen. During later experience, I never had fear from hallucinations on Datura. In the morning I woke up and had no memories about any dreams. In the afternoon that day I decided to ingest somewhat bigger amount of seeds. So I ate 50 seeds. Then I went to play soccer with my friends. I expected better results this time, but nothing happened, absolutely nothing, not even some kind of feeling weird. Now I was trying to figure out where to spend entire night so I could ingest real big amount of seeds. I was questioning my friends, what are they doing tonight, but no one had any plans since it was Monday. But lucky for me, one friend organized a LAN party for that night, so I told him I'll be there. Now I had entire plan worked out and just waited for evening. About 10 p.m. I ingested 300 seeds orally, simply swallowed them with water, and told my folks that I am going to LAN party and will be back in the morning. Then I took a walk to my friend's house waiting for the effects to appear. Len was in the basement of his house and I came last. There was a lots of people with computers connected in local area network playing games and talking. I knew all of them, but told no one what I took, or informed anyone of my possible behavior. I waited for an hour and a half and there was no sign of any effects. I had more seeds with me, so I took 50 more. Now I ate total of 350 seeds. Around midnight, 2 hours from first ingestion, I started to feel weird. It was a physical feeling all over my body. I felt extremely strong rush of energy in my body spreading from torso to limbs where it was strongest. This energy made my arms and legs burn and itch. It would be the closest description, in an unexplainable way, forcing my body to move. If I would sit still on the couch, I could not bear this awful feeling and I had to move. So I started to change positions on couch very fast, trying to find one in which I will have my peace and could rest. I was also feeling very tired, but there was no such position. Then I tried to get up on my feet, but when I did I could not stand on them cause they felt weak, so I crushed back on couch. After that I don't remember anything until I was home in the morning around 6 a.m. But later people who were present informed me of my behavior after I asked them. They told me I was talking to shoes, and few times petting them. I was mumbling and they could not understand what I was saying. I remember my throat was insanely dry. I asked for water. They gave me a half-liter cup for beer and filled it with water, and then gave it to me. I was sitting on the floor and spilled all water between my legs. I almost spilled it on someone's computer tower. After that I was unplugging network connections from hub, disconnecting people in the middle of the game, so they started to yell on me, and they asked me why am I doing it. I mentioned some unfamiliar names and told that they have told me too. But I repeat, no one knew why I was behaving like this. At first they were thinking I am joking. After that they asked me what did I take, cause all of them knew I was doing all kind of drugs, but I wasn't in condition to answer them. In one moment I started to shake and act really wild and crazy, and my friend's mom came in basement to see what was going on. Lucky for me they succeeded to calm me down until she came, but I was still a little bit shaking. In the morning one friend drove to my house and left me 2 streets away and asked me if no way home. I told him where my house is, so he concluded I can come back home myself. This is a part of experience which is not entirely familiar to me. I remember coming home and doors were locked, because it was 6 a.m., but I did not have any orientation in time, and could not understand why are they locked. In a matter of seconds I forgot that they are locked and tried to open them again. I was repeating this more than 10 times when I remembered to see if anyone is inside. I looked through the front window and saw both of my sisters watching TV inside the living room, so I told them to unlock the door. Then I went to door and waited my sister to open them, but she never did, because she really wasn't there. All the time I had a key in my pocket, but I thought I lost it. I remember in a blur I walked the streets all over my part of city and always holding something in my hand and waving with it until I dropped it. When I looked at the ground to pick it up, it wasn't there. This way I thought I lost my key, my cell phone and few other stuff. Then I went to my grandma to ask her for a key. On the way to her house I saw my grandma standing on the street. When I came to her, she was covered with one of those black garbage bags. I concluded that she was hiding from me because she thinks I will kill her. She was curled up into a ball with a garbage bag over her. I stopped and waited for a few seconds looking at her, and since she wasn't moving I continued to my grandma. When I came to her, she asked me why I came so early and what is going on. I told her I need a key and also mentioned that I saw grandma on the street with a black cloak. My grandma looked at me in wonder and asked me if I was okay. I don't remember what else was I saying, and I went home again. Now there was my father sitting on a porch by the doors. I tried to open them again, but they were still locked. I tried few more times, every time forgetting that it is locked. Then I asked my dad, does he have a key? He was just smoking a cigarette, looking at me, saying nothing. Then I saw my sister walking over the porch back and forward. I asked her what is she doing and why is she walking here with no reason. But like Dad, she did not answer. All of them were illusions, but so real I could not distinguish them from reality. I also noticed that all the weird and crazy stuff I saw seemed reasonable and logical at the time, so I did not question them at all. After lots of tries to enter the house, I somehow did. I think I rang a bell, and someone opened the door to me, although I do not remember who. There was no one in the house really except my little sister, who was ill and I should take care of her this morning until Mom and Dad come from work. So you could imagine how I took care of her under influence of Datura. Somehow I managed to boil a tea for her and not to kill myself. When I went upstairs to bring her tea, I saw her sleeping, and my mom next to her. I did not realize that my mom is at work. Later I talked to my sister in the living room about stuff that was on TV, but I actually talked to myself. Then I talked to my dad about things that I do not remember. After I heard a bell and went to open the door. When I opened them, in front of me were my two best friends, let's call them R and Z, so I invited them in. R had a really scary, madman smile on his face and he could not take it off. I asked R, did he take Datura too, and he said yes. On the stairs to my room, Z just disappeared and I found nothing odd about this. So me and R are in my room. He said that he came to pick me up and we are going to the beach. I asked him how did he come, and he said with his brother with car. I looked out and there was no car. Then he explained that his brother is coming to pick us up in few minutes. So I packed my towel, drink and food in a backpack. During my conversation with R, he melted in the chair in which he was sitting and only his crazy smile was left on the flower pattern of chair. I told him to quickly get out of the chair, cause if my parents see him like this they will notice he was on drugs. This was totally senseless, but it was normal to me in the moment and I saw nothing weird in it. So I took my backpack and left the living room and concluded that my parents won't see R in the chair only if he does not smile, so his mouth will be camouflaged on the flower pattern of the chair. When I came in the living room, R was already there but now inside the other chair, and there was no smile on it. I just knew he is in there. Because there was no smile he could not talk, so I was asking questions and he would answer by swinging 1 time for yes and 2 times for no. He was in one of those swinging chairs. Then he disappeared too and I was left alone. My father finally came home, real father, not hallucination, around 11 a.m. After that I told him few senseless things and had to explain what was I talking about and just talked more complex and more senseless things to explain previous ones. I somehow assured my dad I did not take any drugs and I am okay, so he let off the subject. That entire day I could see small things moving, parts of furniture animated. If I would concentrate on something I could see it transforming. I managed to disassemble doorknob into basic parts like screws and stuff, with just concentrating on it, and I saw it like animated hologram, screws unscrewing and parts disassembling. 2 days after that I could not read anything cause my pupils were huge. After that my eyes returned to normal condition. And for the end I'd like to warn everyone to take Datura with extreme caution. I had lots of luck not to hurt myself or end up in police station or in mental institution. The best environment for Datura is some wilderness or something like that, far from people, traffic etc. The sitter is also must have during this trip. I made a mistake thrusting my big experience with hallucinogenic drugs, but Datura is something very different, powerful and dangerous, and on high doses no matter how experienced you are you cannot control yourself or your sight of vision. Datura also makes you very dumb and stupid with no common sense or logical thinking. So there I was, young, poor, but in love, so much so we never realized it. Ain't that the way, people? We were in good form, ready and willing for more than mushies. At the time someone found out that if you bought a box of cigarettes for asthmatic and boiled them up, you'd be in for one major trip. At £1.66 per pack, this was to be tried. Era would note, low-dose Datura leaf cigarettes were sold to reduce asthma mostly in the early part of the 20th century. A gang of like-minded cosmonauts gathered and I was nominated head chef. I tore the cigarettes up and boiled them for ages. The stench was horrible, but I was optimistic that anything that smelled so bad had to be good for you. So the brew was done and I presented the masterpiece to the eager posse and we all took a cup. To this day I couldn't tell you what sort of doses or what part of the plant we took, but it wasn't much really. After a few minutes I felt the elevator in the Brain Hotel go up. I also felt my girlfriend start to lift off. It was amazingly telepathic. We both began to communicate without words and could tell who was on the way up or not. Those who were too concerned with tripping got no hit whatsoever, that I find hard to believe myself, but it was so. As things got higher the immersion was more than total, we were just on a level of our own, talking to people in places that just weren't there. Bilocation is another feature of the trip. I didn't get big visual/auditory effects but just total strangeness, otherworld, parallel universes. All in all we were gone fishing for 3 days on just that one dose. It took years for the full impact to fully sink in. Reality was never quite the same for either of us, neither could we ever qualify or really explain what happened. There are negatives in the taking, that it tastes vile, I mean you'll have to swallow your own vomit to keep it in, it leaves a horrible taste in your mouth for days, and it destroys your ability to focus for a long time. Overall though, we returned to it several times later, once going a full week out. It is to be recommended with caution. Have people there to mind you and avoid at all costs negative people and tense situations. It is only to be done with close people you can trust. I'd love to say more but I'm on the boss's time. Sweet dreams. A meeting with a witch's herb. I was aware that Daturas have been used for thousands of years in the American continent in diverse magical rituals. I wanted to experience what type of reaction I was going to get if I ingested some. I was very afraid and careful, because I have heard terrible things about its effects, but nevertheless I somehow went ahead with my query. Finally, in an event decided by fate, I drank a cup, probably one sip, of tea of a quite small tip, a pinch, of a Datura leaf, what species I don't exactly know, probably Datura inoxia. The first hours went by with no effects except some drowsiness. The next day everything was as usual except for a terrifying vision. Whether I closed or opened my eyes, I could see in front of me or slightly above me a horrible living human skull, with its skin flayed, and bright big eyes staring at me, and blood or human secretions drooping from the flayed skin. The image seemed to be superimposed in a sort of double exposure against the usual world as I saw it. If I went outside I could see perfectly well the streets, but in a strange inexplicable way the horrid-lived skull kept staring fixedly at me at the same time. This went on day and night for about 10 days, and of course I was desperate because the skull vision wouldn't go away. I could see it anywhere I went, sleeping or being awake, eating, talking to people or alone, watching TV or walking inside or outside the house, never fading, never disappearing. I had no type of physical disabilities or other impairments with the herb's intake. I could function perfectly well as usual in my daily chores except for the vision. At one point I thought I would have to kill myself because the image was going strong non-stop after 5 or 6 days, it was driving me crazy, and I thought perhaps it wouldn't go away ever, no matter what I did. The skull or flayed head just stared directly into my eyes implacably. Fortunately the image started to slowly fade after 10 days of going on strong. I survived this dreadful and interesting adventure, which I don't regret having had it. Now I know from my own experience, this plant takes you to a horrific dimension just like it is mentioned elsewhere, in books or literature of many cultures. What saved me was probably the small dose I drank. feed and fuel on plant wisdom and share their experiences for the benefit and enjoyment of all. I have been psychedelically frustrated for a long time. I have searched for psychedelics as a means of reality and consciousness expansion, but haven't had much luck finding any psychedelics. I read about Datura, found some, and harvested it even though I expected it to be horrible. Almost everything I have read on the plant said it would make me go crazy. I did it anyway. The first time I experienced Datura I was by myself. I ate 25 seeds, felt nothing for a couple hours, and decided to smoke some of it. I noticed something off as I smoked the Datura, but I couldn't tell what. I decided to go to sleep when it hit me, and it hit me hard. It was the freakiest feeling I have ever known, but I pulled myself out of it in about 30 seconds. Once I got my head around the fact that I was on Datura, it didn't bother me. One thing about the Datura that has been a recurring theme is that it didn't make me feel necessarily fucked up. My head spun a different direction, my thoughts looped for what seemed like forever, my dreams were somehow different, but I wasn't feeling like I was on a drug necessarily. Well, I woke up and realized that I was indeed quite affected by the Datura, and not just in those first 30 seconds. I tried Datura again the next day with two friends I shall refer to as A and K. Why am I not using their names? It makes no sense, but I guess since so many other people who submit these reports don't use names, I won't either. K didn't want to smoke much, but she did try a little. A and myself noticed something familiar yet indistinct about the Datura. It tasted familiar, but at the same time it didn't. The effects were very pronounced in me, and along with the alcohol I had drank, it made me feel like hugging everybody. This was not the delirium I had read about. It was something completely new, yet something completely familiar. I woke up the next morning still feeling the effects, as did A. So I went and decided to experience Datura again with these good people. It was the afternoon, a lovely day, and some wine was most definitely in order. After the wine was drank and gone, Datura was smoked. This time Kay smoked more and definitely had a strong response. To say that she had unlimited energy would be an understatement. I've never seen someone so full of energy before. It could easily be perceived as an adverse reaction, but I don't think it was. I was feeling a new kind of energy, as I believe A was too. We all agreed to take a walk, and I couldn't stand just sitting around in the apartment. This walk will undoubtedly be the best walk of my life. It was warm, it was friendly, everything seemed to shine and shimmer. It was very nice. We walked, picked flowers, ate berries, and we even found some pot growing near a parking lot. The whole time we all smoked any small pieces of half-smoked cigarettes we could find, as nicotine fed into the wonderful energy. I picked up some herbal supplements while we were at the store, and we picked a little of the pot we found even though it was premature. When we got back we smoked the premature undried pot, finding that it was not ditchweed and had the potential for greater things, even if it didn't do much at the time. The Datura had blessed us. I made a tea out of the kava and valerian he got at the store. It had a definite effect on all of us, making us sleepy and such. My extremities felt warm. I took a walk, which proved to not help my sleepy condition, but I made it and eventually got back. More Datura was smoked, this time with my friend P in attendance. I can't remember the exact order of what happened since I was on the third day of a Datura binge, but I think we got some beer after that and smoked some more Datura. The beer helped me to wake up a little, which is odd since that usually doesn't happen. P and I talked for a long time and stayed up past 4 a.m. This conversation did something to me, I don't know what, but I think I'm glad for it. I woke up today exhausted and unsure. Caffeine helped. I definitely still feel some after effects. My advice to anyone thinking of trying Datura: be with good people, drink good wine and water too. I got pretty dehydrated from the alcohol and the Datura and the caffeine that is necessary the next day, and don't overdo it. Following these rules, I find Datura to be a wonderful and unique tool to gaining a new perspective on life. After doing a great deal of research on various psychoactive plants, I stumbled upon an oddly familiar one. The large white trumpet flowers instantly screamed Datura. I never knew before just how many grow downtown in people's yards. Quite excited at this find, I decided to pick a bunch of leaves and 2 immature seed pods. When I got home, I boiled about a cup of water in the microwave with 2 Datura leaves and a few immature white seeds. When the tea was ready, it had a yellow tinge to it, but the liquid was very translucent still. I added a bit of honey to mask the nasty taste of the Datura and sipped it down. There were some initial effects that began to kick in after about 20 minutes as I proceeded to bike over to a friend's condo. I started to get a bit drowsy, noises got turned down, and my mouth was getting pretty dry. On that note, make sure that you have water when using Datura, or you'll dehydrate, and that hurts. After about an hour and a half, the real effects started to kick in. My eyes felt a bit funny, like they were swollen. This didn't hurt, but it did feel funny. I went into my friend's washroom and checked my eyes. The pupils were huge, you could only see about of iris left. Then the weird shit started to happen. I found it difficult to balance when I tried to walk, and I began to see fleeting images of people out of the corner of my eye. As well, I got pretty incoherent. I would be talking to my friend and not being totally into the conversation. At no point did I feel any nausea though. Everything got very surreal and certain objects in my friend's apartment stood out more than normal. When I went home, I saw my mom, and I was sure that she had a black eye, even though she didn't. I kept asking her why she had a black eye. Later that night, I got an email from my girlfriend, which I read, but after I went to sleep and woke up today, I wasn't sure of anything I had done in the period of time that I was under influence. I couldn't remember if I had actually talked to my mom, or gotten that email. I checked later and I had done all these things, but I still wasn't sure in my own mind. A summary of the effects that this had on me is as follows. Blurred vision, only for up-close objects. Incoherent speech. Lack of balance. Dry mouth and throat. Mild hallucinations, inanimate objects looking like people. Delirium. Some breathing difficulty, not much though. Sucking shit at Unreal Tournament. To conclude, Datura is not for casual use because you are put in a dreamy state and it is difficult to discern what is real and what isn't. However, I have noticed no ill effects as of yet. Perhaps my dosage was too low for any wild hallucinations and prolonged loss of vision. Anyway, if you're going to take Datura, I would suggest starting with a brew of 2 leaves, it'll give you a good taste of the potential of Datura. I had heard from one source or another that Datura, a plant that grows abundantly in my neighborhood, was frequently used by Native Americans to trip. At that point the only other hallucinogen I had ever experienced was ecstasy. Nothing, however, could have prepared me for the experience that I was about to have. I, knowing nothing about Datura or its dosages or really even just what kind of effect it would have, began to ingest it, in fairly large quantities on Sunday night with a few of my friends. I take responsibility for bringing it to them. At first it produced a pleasant narcotic effect every time that I took it. The first real hallucination that anybody had was reported later that night. It seems that one of my friends thought that he went to the bathroom, felt the splashback from the toilet water, and was going on his merry way when he realized that in fact, he had produced nothing at all. I continued to take Datura all of that week, growing more and more delirious with every dose. It must have been fairly addictive for me, because even in my wildest stages of delirium I managed to consume more and more. Just some of the highlights from my week of terror and confusion are, talking to people in the shower who weren't there, being in a state of utter confusion as to who I was or where I was, running out of one of my college courses in a daze after the professor's hair started growing before my eyes. At that point, the walls were also closing in, and taking a nap, only to wake up several times thinking that I had dropped a cigarette in my bed. I took Datura several weeks later for some reason. This time I consumed a very large dosage in one sitting. I was out with some friends who were sober. I made them take me home where I spent the entire night running around in my basement, naked, trying to find clothing to put on but being unable to do so. I also carried on conversations with people who weren't there, mistook dog food for cereal and ate a large quantity, tried to rip the pipes out of the ceiling. I kept hitting my head on them, and, I think, peed on a good deal of the objects in my basement. I urge anybody who thinks that this sounds like a good time to reconsider. I've been to the depths of delirium and it really sucks. Being bored, we decided to try what the locals, South Africa, calls malpeat, meaning mad pits, also known as Jimsonweed. In Africa it grows next to the roads in plentiful supply. The seed pods looks like a big ball of spikes, and contains small black seeds. We took 1,000 pits at 6 o'clock after not eating anything the whole day. We were after fast absorption, c. 4 hours later and nothing has happened yet, possibly due to the hard pits? And my friend left for home, leaving me alone. Soon after, I started feeling queasy and restless, with vivid heat flashes throughout my body. Another hour and I was overwhelmed by the drug. It came on suddenly, turning my throat cork dry, and leaving me off balance. I staggered to the kitchen faucet, intent on killing my thirst. What horror, then, when I realized I couldn't drink anything. The pain caused by swallowing brought tears to my eyes. That's how dry my throat was, and moments later I would vomit the water up again. The whole night was spent dry heaving. These side effects were mild, though, compared to the hallucinations. These were incredibly vivid, and so far removed from LSD hallucinations as can come. It looked like everything was vibrating very quickly, and it just became hazy. I distinctly remember a friend, dead over a year, talking to me before being absorbed into a tree, and the sight of my whole house filled with cobwebs. My friend also experienced the cobweb effect. For some reason, there are whole gaps missing from my memory, thankfully. In an attempt to avoid the horrible hallucinations, I tried to go to sleep, but whenever I closed my eyes, I got the feeling something was rushing at me, and I jerked them open again. Somewhere in my mind, I realized that this what it felt to be poisoned. Round about dawn, 6 o'clock, the effects started to diminish. I immediately fell down on my bed, trying to sleep. When I woke up at noon, I had a skull-breaking headache, and still couldn't eat anything. These passed by the next day, but for the rest of the next week, I couldn't focus my eyes properly. Reading was impossible, causing my eyes to water. Considering that I work in a library, this was most frustrating. My friend experienced similar effects, except he didn't have the focusing problem. The hallucinogenic effect of Jimsonweed is unquestionable, and you can't get more mind-altering than this. Not even 1,000 microgram LSD trip made me lose my head like Malpete. But the side effects made this the most profoundly horrible experience of my life. Cheap LSD substitute this is not. You need this stuff like you need a brick in the face. My experience began at the local community college I was attending, right before my art history class. I had obtained the baby plant from a nursery the day before. Hating my life and wanting desperately to change it, and to become more powerful over others, I ate the root raw, which I had already torn off the rest of the plant. It was a baby plant, but extremely potent nonetheless. I took too much, which was evident when my mouth first became dry, then became extremely dry, and then I started to choke. I couldn't breathe. I thought I might die this time for sure. I was still directly outside my classroom, and unfortunately, directly across the path from the campus security office. I began trying to vomit, but nothing came out. The poison was in me and taking hold quickly. I began trying to call for help. A janitor approached me and said he could tell that I was going through alcohol withdrawal, and that he'd been through those shakes before. I must have drifted out of consciousness, because I was suddenly in the school fountain with my socks and shirt off. A teacher I had once had, who I later heard was an ex-DEA agent, tried to calm me down. Someone had apparently called the city police, because next thing I knew 3 of them were surrounding me. They asked me what I took, but I didn't tell them. They said they knew I was on speed. I was arrested, put in the back of the car handcuffed, and I lost consciousness, waking up next handcuffed to a table in the police station. My blood was taken, and I was fingerprinted and put in a cell to sober up. I began to pound on the door violently screaming, and someone came and told me to settle down before they'd let me out. So I sat down in a squat and waited. I then saw on the concrete slab a demon lying in a death posture with sharp teeth, eyes closed, wicked grin. After that disappeared, I suddenly saw my younger brother, and I could not recollect how he was in there with me. I felt so bad that I had gotten my brother involved in this. I concocted some story in my head to explain to myself how we had ended up in jail, as I suddenly had almost no recollection of what had happened. My brother's perfectly realistic image with purple eyes did not speak, despite my questioning. I turned around and he had disappeared. Also, I would periodically see a TV with the news on outside my cell door on a shelf as I looked through the cell door window. I watched to pass the time. I was let out of my cell a couple of hours later, still a bit delirious, but sober enough to see the TV I had been watching was all along just a cardboard box. I must say, I know I almost died that night. The dosage was almost too much for my body to handle. But once I got through the initial convulsions and stuff, the trip commenced with no ill physical effects. The evil power I had tried to achieve may or may not have been imparted to me, though to this day I'm still not fulfilled spiritually inside. Before I start, I must tell you that I've experimented with numerous psychedelics, including DMT, and Datura was by far the most intense and real. The whole thing started when me and my friend were messing around with a campfire we were trying to build in his backyard. It's kind of strange how I spotted the huge Stramonium plants in his backyard. It is true what they say about the plants having a presence because I was constantly drawn to something out of the corner of my eye. Eventually her presence was made known to me when I decided to journey to the side of a large shed that was off to the side of me. After a little of exploration, there they were, a huge group of Datura Stramonium plants with nice white flowers and huge, bulging seed pods. The only thing I could figure out was that the fire lit up the backyard enough to let me see them out of the corner of my eye. My friend knew absolutely nothing about it, but upon brief explanation I revealed the numerous secrets I had read about her powers. I soon inquired if he would be interested in trying some Datura tea. My friend, not being a big drug user, declined. But he said he would take care of me if I wished to proceed. Upon his encouragement, I couldn't keep myself from experimenting with the temptress. We retrieved a soup pot from a junk heap in his garage and proceeded to wash the pot out with water. Then I gathered the lovely plant teacher. Hanging the soup pot over the fire, which looked like a pot the military serves soup in for the whole army, I set the water to boil. While we were waiting for the water to boil, we proceeded to chop the 3 Datura plants into nice little pieces. I might add these were whole plants with their roots washed off with water. After many hours of boiling, we decided that the witch's brew was done. We bottled the slimy, green tea into 2 or 3 milk jugs. After an hour of meditation and prayer for a decent trip, I decided to down the brew, and with milk and sugar might I add. It wasn't too bad. I've tasted worse. I would say after about 1 hour I started to get extremely hot, and had to stay away from the fire because for one the brightness was bothering my eyes, and the heat it threw off was unbearable. By now it was morning, but we were the only ones around, so my friend didn't panic, but I did because I was starting to trip extremely hard. I couldn't for the life of me remember if I had drank 2 cups or 3. To this day I have no idea. My friend says closer to 3. I wasn't talking to him much though. He had become an evil witch with trolls circling her legs that had cast an evil spell on me. I started ranting and raving about how damn evil he was, and how he couldn't have my soul. For the next couple of hours I was basically switching realities and journeying. Went to Mars, and talked to Marvin the Martian. Whenever I came back to non-Datura reality I was having the common problem that always happens on Datura trips. I was trying to light a cigarette but never could. I only had matches and they kept on wriggling around like snakes. This freaked me out extremely, and I quickly dropped the matches and ran for my life. I ran into his bar and he lived on a farm. That was a big mistake. When I finally got the light on after about 20 minutes of fumbling around for the switch, which I had turned on hundreds of times, I saw her, or them I should say. In the rafters of the barn there were 6 Datura plants that had women's hair but beetle faces, that were reaching down from the top with tentacles trying to grab me. Soon after that vision, my friend, the good friend that he is, entered the barn to keep an eye on me. He said I was going on how he was working together with the plants in the rafters, and they all were trying to get me. The rest of the trip is so hard to remember, but I had the same match wriggling around experience numerous times after that. Can't remember much more, but I must say that Datura has such an earthly feel to it that it made me feel like one with everything and everyone. The only thing that I remember about the next day was I was having God trips and I was being a jerk to my friend. I thought I was better than him and whatnot. He is still my friend, so I know he's loyal, especially considering how mean I was to him at times, but then I would always cry and say I was sorry. Then as soon as I said that I would think I was God again and would start being a jerk. The third day was kind of a half trip half recovery day. The trip is so hard to explain, so bear with me. A deep sleep that included numerous lucid dreams followed the third day. I dreamed that I was at a hotel and was eating dinner with my parents. I went outside to smoke and a street gang attacked me. I immediately ran into the hotel only to find that everyone at the huge dinner party had left. So, my next instinct was to get in the elevator and go to our room. But, instead of the elevator going to the room, it went to the roof. Everybody was on the roof. When I joined my parents though, everybody turned into vampires and proceeded to drag me to a huge cross and nail me to it and burn me alive. This dream was followed by many, some I remember, some I don't. Overall I'd say though scary, the experience was interesting. I want to repeat it, but maybe with a smoked version. Everyone that has experienced it tripping should try Datura at least once with a guide. The biggest mistake I made was at the time of this experience I had only done LSD a couple of times and shrooms like twice, so I wasn't too experienced. But I am now, and I think I could handle her powers now better than I did then. P.S. To help pre-trip anxiety, try smoking a little of cannabis before you trip. That's all, folks.
When I took the Datura, I had only heard about it a few days before. Some of my friends had eaten the root and felt no effects at a couple of days before. Me and my few friends went on a road trip, and we brought the Datura root that we had left to try to sell. 5 of us went on the trip. On one particular day, Ryan, one of my friends, got arrested for shoplifting. The rest of us went on without him. That night we parked somewhere by the beach to get some sleep. Jan and Shauna, in the front, went right to sleep, but me and Daniel couldn't sleep. At around 3 in the morning, Daniel asked me if I wanted to eat the Datura. I said sure. We each had about the same amount. We weren't sure if anything was going to happen because of when they had eaten it a few days before and nothing happened. The taste of the Datura root was very bitter. We washed it down with water. Then we started talking about how we thought that it was going to affect us. Sure enough, it did. It took, I'd say, about 15 minutes, but then again, I'm not a very good judge of time. The first thing I noticed was that my hands seemed very large and fat. I was studying my hands and then all of a sudden they became covered with black cuts. Then I knew I was tripping. I started tripping really hard and I thought I had taken too much. All of the pains in my body were greatly exaggerated. I had had a headache and stomachache when I took it. My mouth was so dry I could barely talk. I had to take a drink of water, but I could barely lift the water bottle. It was really hard to move at all. Everywhere I looked, I saw hallucinations. I had to puke, so I tried to open the car door, but it was really hard. I finally found the door handle, but the door was locked. So I reached up to unlock the door, but my hand went through the lock. I tried a couple more times and finally got it. I dry heaved outside with the top part of my body hanging out of the car. I thought I was ODing. Shauna kept asking me if I was alright, but I couldn't answer her. I don't remember this, but she said that I kept hanging out of the car and then I would get back in and leave the door open. She said that she had to keep closing it. After I was done puking, all my pain was gone. I thought I was in a log cabin with my grandma. I kept seeing people peeking in the windows. I kept waking up Shauna and Jan with my screaming about people peeking in the windows. This kept happening, but all the people ended up being my friends, so I started having conversations with them. I even talked to Ryan, who was in juvenile hall that night. Me and Daniel both kept thinking the car was rolling back and forth. Once I woke up Jan and Shauna screaming, "Stop, the car's rolling forward, we're going to hit the wall." They told me that the car was not rolling and there was no wall. I guess me and Daniel just spent all the night talking to people who weren't there. In the morning, around the area we were in, a lot of people go jogging in the morning. I saw one old lady approaching the car. I thought she was Ryan, so I jumped out of the car and started running towards her, yelling Ryan's name because I thought he had gotten out of juvie and had found us. When I got close, I realized it was an old lady, so I got back in the car. We sat there for a long time. I think I was kind of half asleep or something. I was kind of just not there. I kept thinking that Daniel and Ryan had gone to pick mushrooms, but Daniel was sitting right next to me and Ryan was far, far away. I kept asking Shauna when they would get back from picking mushrooms, and she told me they weren't picking mushrooms, and I would say oh yeah and then forget and ask her again. All that day, mine and Daniel's vision were fucked up. We couldn't read anything. After we left our spot by the beach, I kept hearing voices, but I no longer saw the people to accompany them. At first I kept thinking that Shauna was talking to me, but she wasn't really saying anything. All that day me and Daniel still hallucinated a little, like seeing faces in the dirt and the mountains. We also could not remember worth shit. We would be talking and then be like, wait, what the fuck were we talking about? Well, that night we got a good night's rest, and the next day we thought we were perfectly sober. Daniel, Jan and I went that day to go pick up Ryan from juvie because he had gotten out. It was late at night by the time we were getting back, and we made a stop at Daniel's grandparents' house. We were considering staying there for the night, except I would have to sleep in a room by myself because I was the only girl. Well, we were sitting in the living room talking to Daniel's uncle, and then I started to trip again. At first I thought I would be okay, but then it got worse. I asked Ryan to come outside with me so I could tell him that I was starting to trip again. By the time I got outside, my legs were so wobbly I could barely walk. Daniel came outside to see what was going on, and I told him I was starting to trip again, and he said he was too. Ryan had to help me get to the car. Soon after, we left Daniel's grandparents. Laying down helped make my tripping stop. Daniel tripped for a little bit longer. He had to puke out of the window of the car. Ryan asked him if he wanted Pepsi to wash his mouth out, and Daniel was just like, huh? He had forgotten what Pepsi was. I started to trip more later that night. After it went away, though, it didn't come back. So the effects for me and Daniel lasted about 3 days.
I had heard about this drug while I was in school one day, and I decided to tell my sister because I knew where I could get a lot of this so-called trumpet-shaped, and I went and took one large seed pod and split it down the middle. The seeds were very ripe and brown in color. I took the seeds and washed them down with water. I felt nothing at first, then after approximately 30 to 40 minutes I began to feel very flushed and drunk. I was beginning to talk about how much I loved everything and how great everything was. Then the hallucination started. My sister left to the kitchen, but I could still see her in my peripheral vision, so I kept talking to her about life and how awesome it was. I continued for about 15 minutes before I looked in her direction to find that she left. She came back into the room and was confused because I was talking to no one. I then asked her for some of the popcorn that she made and a glass of water. The popcorn was the most amazing experience I've had with food ever. It was so delicious, I filled my body with a warm glowing feeling, and the taste was so intense it made me tear in the eyes. And the water was so pure, cold and refreshing, I felt like I was floating about 2 feet off of my chair. Then when I told her how good everything was, she asked for some, and I looked down to see there was no food or water to be found. I had hallucinated really bad. I then proceeded to go to my friend's house, and I couldn't figure it out, but my legs kept giving out and I couldn't talk coherently. I remember getting to my friend's house and telling him I was really high, so he brought out a lot of hard drugs, so I left and went downtown. I started looking at birds and seeing them in my peripheral vision everywhere. Colors were very intense and I felt very drunk. I went back home and tried to talk to my brother, but all that came out was garbled nothing, and he laughed at me. I started to mumble and rave, so I went into my room and looked in the mirror and saw my best friend sitting on the bed. I was very calm and excited to see her, so I talked to her for about an hour before I turned around to ask her opinion, and she wasn't there. I remember feeling the weirdest silence come over me, and I started to think that I didn't want to be high anymore. The hallucinations lasted another 4 hours or so, and when I woke up I couldn't read small print or see properly for about 3 days. This stuff really messes up your eyes for a couple days afterward. All in all, it's a very mind-blowing, calming experience that I really enjoyed. In fact, I did it 6 days straight at increasingly lower doses until 2 kids in my school died from it and 5 more were hospitalized. I researched it and found it was very toxic, so I never did it again. I do not recommend this one for the weak-minded. It's a great spiritual trip. Cheers! Last October, the day before Halloween actually, 2000 is when I made the biggest mistake in my life. You see, I wanted to get high on some sort of hallucinogen, and so went with the strongest one I could come up with. I managed to get a hold of some Datura and oxia seeds online, which is full of atropine. Not wanting to kill myself or anything, I decided to only eat 20 of the seeds. Now this was at about 11 a.m. I proceeded to choke down the god-awful tasting things and went to watch some television on the big screen in our living room. At about 12 o'clock I got slightly dizzy, just like you would feel after spinning in circles for about 5 seconds. Then I became incredibly tired and had to urinate like you wouldn't believe. I went to the toilet, and try as I might, I couldn't manage to pee. I think within the next 15 minutes I got out of bed about 10 times to head to the bathroom in another useless attempt at relieving myself. I finally just gave up and decided to go to sleep. I went unconscious at about 12:30. By unconscious, I don't mean a coma or sleeping, I mean I slipped into sort of a subconscious state, where everything still worked, but I didn't know I was there. It felt like one big dream. I dreamt about various things, like people repeating my name and saying, "If you don't hold still I'll have to poke you," over and over. And people shoving me to the floor. I remember dreaming about tripping and hitting my chin on the corner of the clothes dryer. At about 5 p.m. I woke up completely rested and was ready to go do something, but was completely annoyed when I found I couldn't move my arms or legs. It was like they weighed a ton. Then I heard a guy repeating my name saying, Steve, you need to calm down. Do you know where you are?" Yes, I replied, I'm in bed and I want to get up. No you're not, Steve. Yeah right. You were in the hospital. Oh shit. Something was terribly wrong. I fell asleep and now I'm in the hospital, this isn't right. I looked around and found myself surrounded by nurses and doctors. This is going to feel real uncomfortable, Steve, and in went the catheter. Okay, this is taking too long, so let's wrap it up. I stayed in the hospital until about 4 p.m. the next day, almost 24 hours in ICU. I had to have about 3 IVs. Plus a couple more because I kept moving around when they put them in. If you don't hold still I'll have to poke you over and over. Yeah, that really happened. And you can bet that the scar on my chin came from when I fell on the dryer. Being shoved to the floor happened when I was beating the living daylights out of the police and paramedics who were trying their hardest to restrain me. I had to have a catheter, and drink a pint of charcoal, yum. I ended up wetting myself. I called the nurses and doctors various choice words. Overall I ended up really messing up my health and pissing off a lot of people. I am very lucky I didn't kill myself when I was in that subconscious state. This is not what happens to most people who try to trip on atropine. It isn't this bad. But of all of the people who have taken atropine and survived, I have one of the worst experiences. So, I say, do not ever abuse atropine, for it is 100% certain you will regret it. Just look at my $10,000 hospital bill. I was at my friend's house and decided to try out angel trumpets. I had heard of where a tree was and went and got 2 flowers, a bud of a flower, and 5 or 10 leaves. I put about 2 cups of water in a pot and boiled all the shit for about 20 minutes. I stained out the solids. What was left was a yellowish liquid. There was only a glass left now, and I drank a bit more than half of it. Half an hour later I got kind of sleepy, and after that I had the worst fucking cotton mouth of my life. I felt kind of dizzy, and started getting a little confused. All of the sudden I had to take a piss, but it was the hardest thing ever. It took me about 20 minutes to finish taking the piss. After that it was a big fucking roller coaster ride. I did not know what day it was. I asked my friend if it's today, yesterday, or tomorrow. I could swear that I had cups, pencils, or shit like that in my hand, but when I went to use them they were gone. I kept seeing people that weren't there, and when they were gone I asked where they went. About 3 hours later I decided to walk to my friend Jay's house. I was walking down the road talking to him, but he wasn't there. That was when the weirdest shit happened. I looked at the wall by the sidewalk and saw my friend walking towards me. He stepped out the wall and I asked what's up. He looked at me, turned his head once or twice, and then melted back in the wall. I was amazed. A couple steps later I heard him call me, turned around and yelled what? He looked at me, turned around and then disappeared into the wall. After that I saw something on the ground. It was a cat. I went up to pet it, and it melted into a sprinkler head. I saw the same cat about 5 more times, and each time it was different shit. I got really confused, but kept on walking. All of the sudden I heard a scooter and it pulled up beside me. It was my friend Lil B. He said what's up and then I said what's up and then I was ready to ask him for a ride and he vaporized into the air. This was pretty weird. About 20 yards later was the scariest visual. My dad appeared in front of me. I stopped moving. He asked me what the fuck I was on. I got real scared, held my breath, and closed my eyes for 3 seconds. When I opened them he was gone. The rest of the night I kept seeing people and animals that weren't there and kept thinking I was in different places. I've done shrooms, I've done acid, I've done mescaline, and I've done Dramamine. This shit was definitely the craziest. This report is just a warning about the dosage of Datura Stramonium and there is no recommended dosage safe for the average person. December 27th. Me, a hefty 20 years of age, my brother, Ronnie, and our friend, Johnny, went up snowboarding for a weekend and stayed at a friend's place, just us 3. The main purpose wasn't really to snowboard, it was to ingest the Datura Stramonium seeds I had ordered online a month ago, which I was eager to test after having read reports. After reading of the many strange accounts, I decide the safest thing is to take no more than 40 seeds, no matter what. Well, it's about 2 p.m. and I take my 40 seeds. I tell Ronnie and Johnny to take the car keys, hide them somewhere, hide the knives, get Monopoly ready, don't let me guzzle down Jim Beam if I'm fucking crazed later. And begin. So first I swallow the 40 seeds and wash it down, wish some rum and coke. I wait about an hour. Nothing at all. I start drinking more rum and coke hoping that will jumpstart the trip, nothing. Then I figure I'm gonna have more. Ronnie and Johnny tried to persuade me not to, but I'm stubborn, and figure I can control myself anyway and take the rest of them, 80 more. So I wait around about another hour or so. And now you all probably think, oh shit, this guy just fucked himself, but no. No pupil dilation whatsoever, no hallucinations, nothing but some dry mouth. I am still trying to recover from broken heart disease. Drugs let me down, man. So, the point of the story is, everyone is different, and there is no way to calculate exactly what a proper amount is to ingest. I seem to have a high tolerance to things like alcohol and marijuana, so if you're a lightweight, don't think you're Superman and eat them like nerds. And I've done mushrooms once in my life a couple months ago and had an eighth without hallucinations, although my brain was definitely on steroids. I've also tried salvia once with some lightweights and okay, I was laughing my ass off about absolutely nothing for a minute, but these guys were in a different dimension talking about how they could see warp holes and crap. So know your tolerance before doing something stupid like potentially harming others and or yourself. I was as prepared as ever to take this stuff, with 2 sitters upstate in an empty house without any authoritative figures within 20 miles and nothing happened. And because nothing happened whatsoever, I will try at least 150 to 200 seeds or maybe mess with the leaves or flowers if I can get a hold of them. Tip: start off small and work your way up. You can always have more, but once you've had too much, there's no going back, baby. Me and 2 of my friends ate a tablespoon of Jimson seeds which we found around where we live. A couple of hours passed and I didn't believe anything was going to happen, and I went home and laid down and blam. It hit me. The whole world began becoming just like an intense LSD trip. Then I was gone. I escaped my body. I had a near-death experience. I traveled to other worlds, spirit worlds, and other creatures' worlds. I remember being on a planet like Mars, all red sand and weird rock formations. I was lost and they were really amused with me as I was with them. The aliens, that is. They had big heads, tall, skinny, long arms and legs. These creatures studied me but not with equipment, with their large eyes. I also remember seeing transparent spirits among earth, then a bright light and the most beautiful music I've ever heard. To put it short, I visited heaven. I saw white-robed monks floating around. As of this point of time I don't remember the conversation I had with these angels, but I had one. While I was in these other worlds I had no control of my body. My mother told me I didn't even know who she was or anyone else. She said I was crawling around the house saying I was looking for buds and picking at the floor. I don't remember any of this whatsoever. That happened before the ambulance got there, and it took 8 big cops to restrain my little ass and strap me down. I don't remember this either, or the ambulance ride. The hospital, from the little I remember, was hell. The doctors were treating me like total shit. But since I wasn't in my body this didn't bother me much, and I wondered how much worse they were treating me. The insights I got about life after death were great, but it's something us humans are not prepared to see while on Earth. My suggestion is to not do it unless you're really into OBEs and interested. Out of my 5 friends, 4 of us went to the hospital and got treated like total shit. There is a life after death. Having used Datura a few times in my youth, as well, a related plant that, I believe, here in California, is called Angel's Trumpet. I determined the dosage from reading between the lines from the first Don Juan book. Perhaps, I was just lucky. While it is accurate to say it highly psychoactive, it is not hallucinogenic. It is delusional. I have never believed that any hallucination I saw under the influence of mushrooms, mescaline, acid was anything more than a mirror of my mind or the perception of things usually filtered. Datura and this other plant produce a state where you believe that what you perceive is real. Truly. It contains similar alkaloids as belladonna, scopolamine, and can be very dangerous. The high lasts about 36 to 48 hours. It will allow you to do very stupid and dangerous things. As an example, a group of us consumed a tea made out of the seeds and finely chopped roots. One guy, who dealt drugs and wasn't particularly centered and or able to connect with anyone else in the group, decided to take off. Another guy and I understood that it was dangerous for anybody to become separated, so we pursued him down to a busy boulevard where after a couple of blocks we became freaked and ceased trying to talk him into returning with us. We went back to the house. He went on his way, went to his house, got a suitcase full of drugs, walked to a strange neighborhood and into some old people's house. Whereupon, he began to behave as if he was in his own house. What occurred next I'm sure is obvious. If you really want to get whacked out and have, perhaps, a transcendent experience, this is not it. If reports here and elsewhere are correct, and you want something like that, find a chemist, synthesize some DMT, find a safe place and your deity be with you. At least you won't die. I stumbled across Jimsonweed by accident as it was growing in my uncle's garden, for which it was part of a project of photography for a medical institute on medicinal herbs and plants. I began reading about the uses of it after hearing from my uncle the reason for him growing such a thing. I had found rather inconclusive information ranging from week-long delusions and trips to a useless waste of time from the plant. I began myself by ingesting a number of around 10 seeds over the course of an hour the first time I tried it. Following approximately an hour after ingestion I simply felt stoned and there were minor visual distortions limited to changes in my surrounding and my peripheral vision. I repeated this a few more times on other occasions without much result. I then tried smoking the crushed seeds and found that it simply makes you feel uneasily detached and can cause a rather nasty case of nausea the next day. From here I proceeded to try making a tea. I found successfully that if 10 to 20 seeds are boiled in 2 cups of water for 15 minutes you have the desired substance. The seeds simply start to break down and there is a clear goo that is left from the seeds though they are still whole in most cases. You can strain the seeds if you like but you have more of a chance of draining the goo, which when taken separately if you can manage that really gets you going. The effects were felt roughly a half hour later and not entirely disappointing, in fact rather nice. I felt again basically stoned but with clear perception of my environment. Some minor visual distortions followed such as difficulty focusing to vivid patterns of color when my eyes were closed. My sense of balance was greatly diminished without my noticing until I was about to fall over. It lasted through the remainder of the evening. It was ingested around 8 p.m. The next day I felt generally euphoric but tired. I don't recommend this for everyone, my brother can't handle it. Remember that if you are going to try this that atropine, one of the psychoactive constituents, is a poison and has been fatal in many cases of overdose. Treat it with respect and don't do it often. Good luck and I hope this helps someone. The website Codeine Information has this to say about combining opiates and Datura. Tropane alkaloids obtained from belladonna, 8-tropobelladonna, henbane, hyoscyamine, or thorndale, Datura stramonium, such as atropine, hyoscyamine, scopolamine, and hyoscyamine, can greatly potentiate the effects of opioids. The combination of the two produces a tranquilized state of consciousness known as Twilight Sleep. Damn right it does. I had been planning this trip for a while and so I invited a few people over as trip sitters but about 9 people showed up and it turned into a drunken gathering. One of the people there had a very dirty pipe and they let me scrape out all the resin and smoke it. Aren't I classy? Anyway I smoked about 6 bowls cones of it and was rather stoned. Hearing that Datura increases the effects of codeine to a morphine-like level I decided that it would be interesting to take codeine as well. I assumed that this may lower the risk of Datura-related heart attack. I also assumed that it might stop me from doing something stupid because I'd be too sedated to do anything at all. After extracting the codeine from some bright yellow over-the-counter painkillers I drank the codeine dissolved in water. It is much more bitter than other drugs that I've tasted in their pure form, meth, coke, caffeine monohydrate. Almost immediately afterwards I packed bong after bong full of dried Datura flowers and smoked them. I ended up smoking 3 dried flowers. Half an hour later I decided that I hadn't had enough Datura so I caught a train to get some more. It's probably a bad idea to go in public after consuming Datura. Just near a train station there is a house with Datura in the front yard so I grabbed some and caught the train back. Only took about 15 minutes at most. As soon as I got back is when the Datura kicked in. I felt no buzz but looking back at what happened that seems about right. In real life I placed 2 flowers on the table in front of me. In Datura world I placed about 20 flowers in front of me. Every time I went to grab a flower to eat it, it simply disappeared out of my hand. This seemed completely normal, although irritating, to my tripping brain. I assumed that the Datura hadn't kicked in. Just then the codeine peaked so I went to bed. The best way to enjoy opiates is to lie down, smile and melt into the ground. As soon as I lay down I fell asleep. Wham! Straight away. Except the odd thing is, I was aware of the fact that I was asleep. This was the cool part of the trip. Codeine and cannabis both create cool closed-eye hallucinations. When I took them with Datura, I was part of those hallucinations. I was in them. Exploring them from my point of view. I felt like I was swimming in them. Imagine that with an intense opiate buzz and a mild cannabis buzz. Cool. I was floating in bubbling landscapes or strange cities where rainbow objects were tied in knots. Eventually I woke up. I glanced at the clock and it turned out I was lying there for 3 hours. When I got up, I lit up a smoke and took a drag. As soon as I exhaled, the cigarette disappeared. It turns out I wasn't holding a lighter either. It was just a hallucination. It was very vivid though. I even felt a head spin from the smoke. That was the last hallucination I had. From then on I had blurry vision and a very sore throat. It was so sore I couldn't swallow food. Well, that was my trip. It only lasted about 6 hours, even though most people seem to feel Datura for about 3 days. It turns out that a similar combo, scopolamine and morphine, was used in the 50s during childbirth. With it, the mother could not feel pain and quite often didn't remember anything about the incident at all. A similar state can be reached with much more accessible substances. Not that I recommend Datura. It's very dangerous. I'm one of the few people that had a good trip.